Welcome everyone. A very good afternoon to those of you who are joining us from India, and a very good morning to all of you who are joining us from Europe. My name is Samrat. Together with the European Research Council, EURAXESS India is bringing you today a very exciting webinar about the European Research Council grants. The ERC is the premier funding agency for world-class research. It funds research projects across the world. Researchers from any nationality, from any part of the world, can apply. There are different grant schemes, which we will today present to you. Just let you know that we have two extremely great speakers with us, and I will introduce them to you shortly. We will also have the possibility for a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so you have the possibility to share your questions in the Q&A box. I also want to inform you that we are recording this webinar, and the recording will be made available to you at the end of the session, and also the presentations of the speakers will be shared with you. So you don't need to now, make too many notes. You can just carefully, attentively listen to it. And yeah, so I won't take much of your precious time, and let's go straight into today's session. I would like to take the opportunity to welcome our first speaker, which is Mr. David Gallego Torres. A very good morning to you, David, joining us from Brussels, right?
Yep. Good morning to you, and well, good afternoon also to most of you.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to
Da-
be here.
David, I'll just give a very brief introduction about you, and then I'll ask you to start your presentation and your talk. So, David Gallego Torres works as a scientific officer at the European Research Council Executive Agency since 2017. He's part of the Earth System Sciences panel and has collaborated with other panels such as the Universe Sciences and Mathematics, among others. David holds a degree in geology, a master in petroleum geology, and a PhD in earth sciences. He has more than 10 years' experience in research on, now comes my tricky part, paleoceanography, before joining the ERC as a scientific officer. Thank you so much again, David, and the floor is yours.
Thanks to you for the introduction and for the opportunity to be here and share with you. Well, the basically what Samrat has already introduced a bit, the funding opportunities and the idea that the ERC is open to everybody in the world. So I will start sharing my presentation. Okay, so hopefully you should be able to see the presentation now. Well, as Samrat just introduced, this presentation will be about the funding opportunities of the European Research Council. I work on the Earth system science because of my background in earth science and geology. So please excuse me if I make some reference to this specific panel, but this is really open to all panels. So I will explain the panel distribution in a few minutes. So first of all, the first question is, what is the ERC? The ERC is, of course, the is a funding body. It's part of the big funding family of the European Commission, which is Horizon Europe, but it has some specific parts, specific features that are not so much in line with the rest. And actually, they are quite specific, also quite unique in some aspect. The ERC is looking for the highest quality research. It offers competitive funding and investigator-driven research. That means that the PI, the candidate, the main investigator, is on the leading role and is carrying out their own research, what they propose, in any kind of field. So this is what I like to call scientific freedom or research freedom. It offers the possibility to do your own research with your own idea. The only goal is scientific excellence, the top research that can be carried out in the field. There's some requirement for this, and this is for obtaining this scientific excellence. you are supposed to propose new ideas, new problems that have to be addressed, new topics, or maybe it's the same old topic, but approach in a completely new way, in a completely new approach. But overall, this may break barriers and open a new avenue for breakthrough research, for innovative research. Another important specific feature of the ERC is the governing body. This is the European Research Scientific Council. This is a group of scientists. This is why we often say that the ERC is made from scientists, for scientists, and through scientists. I will repeat this slogan a few times throughout my presentation. You will understand why. So this is a group of scientists, of researchers from all fields, so social sciences, life sciences, physical science, engineer, and they are in charge of the strategy and the design of the work program of the ERC. Even if we are part of the European Commission research program, they act independently. They have their own freedom, so to say, to decide what are the strategies. Uh, Samrat already mentioned this. Who can apply to the ERC? Well, basically any researcher in the world, from any field of research, from any career stage, and from any nationality, or based on any country in the world. The requirement is that the research is carried out in the European Union or associated countries. There are several, I will mention some associated countries like Norway, Turkey, Israel. So there are many countries that are already associated with the European Commission and well, with the European framework program. And this research can be carried out in these countries too. For any career stage, for any field, you will find a specific scheme or a panel to submit your proposal. So what does the ERC offers to researchers? As mentioned before, basically competitive grants and independence for carrying out your own research. There are three main schemes that are the individual schemes, and these are one single PI carrying out, proposing their project and creating their own research group. The three main schemes are Starting Grant, Consolidator, and Advance. The names are sufficiently clear, but Starting Grant is for early career researchers. And this is an opportunity to create your own research group, your own research program, and to kick off your career with a substantial amount and with this independence. Consolidator grants for slightly more experienced researchers to consolidate their position in the field. And finally, advanced grant for, I wouldn't say even senior researchers, just established researchers. Here you can see the different time windows where you can apply, although there might be some changes. This is a teaser for the end of the presentation. And these timeframes, 2 to 7 years for starting grant, 7 to 12 years for consolidated grant. They can also be extended for several reasons that I will also explain later. The budget is 1.5, 2 millions, and 2.5 millions from each of them, but this can be also top up with extra budget if correctly supported and clearly explained in the proposal, up to 1 million. Also, as a novelty, up to 2 million euros can be added to this normal grant if you are relocating to Europe. So if you're moving from outside the EU into the EU. There's a fourth program, which I will explain very briefly, but it's not the main part of the presentation, but I'm happy to reply as much as I can about this, which is the Synergy Grant. These are not single PI, but there are multiple PIs, minimum 2, up to 4 PIs of any career stage, and I want to highlight this. This means that even researchers that could be thinking about applying to study or consolidator grant, they can also be part of a synergy team. The most important feature of the synergy grants is that the different PIs are not just adding their knowledge, but they're adding something that they cannot do alone. So the idea is to create these synergies to create something that is completely new, and none of the PIs can reach that goal completely alone. These are, of course, a bit longer, up to 6 years, and also the budget is uh, substantially higher to share among the different teams. And finally, one of them, can be located outside the EU or associated countries. I've mentioned already the word panels to define the distribution of the ERC for the evaluation. This is just an administrative distribution. There is nothing to do with priorities, main topics to be addressed. This is just an administrative uh, splitting for simplifying or for assigning the proposals to the most adequate expert. So there are three main domains: physical science and engineering, and life sciences, and social science and humanities. When you submit your proposal, you select the panel that is more convenient for you, that is closer to your topic, to the topic of your proposal. You can, however, select a secondary panel if your proposal is in between two fields of research. Within your panel or the two panels, you can also select keywords that may belong to other panels. This doesn't mean that you have to cover everything. You should only suggest or propose a secondary panel if your proposal is really in between the two. Otherwise, it may create some confusion. So once you've decided on the panel or the topic that you are addressing, then you have to prepare your proposal. The proposal is submitted at one single submission step, but it's evaluated in two steps. One part of the proposal, we call it so far part B1, is evaluated at step one, and then the second part of the proposal will be only evaluated if the proposal pass to the second step. The pathway one is a scientific synopsis. It's a short introduction of the proposal, highlighting the state of the art and the relevance of the scientific research you are proposing. It should be novel, it should be relevant, it should be important, innovative, and you should also explain the scientific approach, not the whole methodology, not the whole scientific program, but how are you planning to address this question? The part B2, as I mentioned, this should be only evaluated if the proposal passes the second round, is the form proposal. So here is where you have to include the scientific approach with specific methodology, with all the details, with all the schedules, all the programs, and the resources, and the budget you will need. The candidate CV is assessed also in the first step, so together with Part B1, and it's a summary of the track record and academic activities. There's one last part, and I won't go into that detail, which is the administrative data. The most important thing here is the letter of acceptance of a host institution in the European Union or associated countries. So how is the process of the whole evaluation, the whole cycle? First of all, we create these panels that I mentioned before. And again, now I'm going to refer to this escalation of a program created from scientist to scientist. It is the scientific council role to identify experts for all the 28 panels. They are nominated, identified by the scientific council and invited by them. So there's no volunteering to participate in the panel. They have to be invited and they select the best expert in the field. Once we have this panel, we receive all the proposals, and we assign the reviewers closer to that proposal. But I will make some comments about this. At step one, the review is based on a generalist approach, which means your part B1 should be accessible to a broad audience within the field. I put out the first part on the first step. I assign reviewers based on the abstract and keyword. I'd like to highlight this to make clear that the abstract should be clear, self-explanatory, mentioning clearly the topic that you want to address and the field of research so that we can assign the proposal to the closest expert. Even if it's a generalist approach, we try to make it easy for both the candidate and the reviewers. Panel members and reviewers, they have to declare conflict of interest. Either we identify them or they declare it. And you also have the possibility as candidate to suggest some excluded reviewers, person that some researchers that you prefer, they do not evaluate your proposal. So that is the opening of the step one cycle. The panel members and other evaluators will review the proposal remotely at the home. These other evaluators are maybe, in case of interdisciplinary proposals, panel members from a different panel. So, for example, if you submit your proposal to the Earth Science panel, there are some components from any other panel. So we ask this other panel to provide one review. As I mentioned, these are generalist approaches. So it's not a very detailed analysis of the whole program, just based on the overall approach and the novelty of what you are proposing. Once we receive all the reviews, the full set of reviews is sent back to the entire panel. We ask them to familiarize with all the reviews and all the proposals. Sometimes it's a bit too much, but at least they have the opportunity to see all the proposal and all the reviews. The reason for this is that the final decision is taken on plenary by the entire panel on a panel meeting. So the whole panel joins in Brussels and they discuss and rank the proposal. The ranking is very simple. It's only A, B, and C. A means that the proposal is excellent. It's a very good proposal and it deserves passing to the second step, to the second round. B means the proposal is good, but probably not good enough to pass to the next step. It might be that the proposal is not innovative enough. One of the comments that we often hear is that the proposal is incremental. Incremental means that it's doing the same thing, maybe on a different place, maybe on a different example, but it's not really innovative. The proposal can be very good, but it's not exactly what the IAS is looking for. C is a poor proposal. It doesn't address a really challenging topic. It's not adding anything really new. So in that case, this proposal has a submission restriction of 2 years. Proposal score B, they can resubmit after 1 year, or proposal receiving an A can resubmit in case of need immediately after, so the year after. Unfortunately, we don't have the possibility to invite all A proposals. There is a maximum of 44 to pass to the second step. Proposals that are not invited to the second step, they will receive the feedback. They will receive the whole set of reviews from all the individual reviews from panel members, plus a short summary of the discussion of the decision taken during the panel meeting. Proposals that are invited to step two, they will receive extra reviewers, and these are nominated remote reviewers or remote referees nominated by the panel. I highlight again, the escalation of the from scientist to scientist started with the scientific council that nominated the panel members, and now the panel members decide to nominate expert really specific expert in the field of the proposal, which will provide these remote reviews. Okay, so I mentioned this invitation to the second step. What are we invited to? Are we invited for drinks? No, we are invited for an interview. So at the second step, you as candidate, you have to prepare for the interview. You will be interviewed online after the second round of written reviews. For this step two, the whole proposal is evaluated. The part B1 with the synopsis explaining the state of the art and the novelty, and the part B2, which is the detailed methodology of scientific program and any other resources and budget you need. Again, you will have a set of individual reviews, both from panel members and from these remote referees. And there will be a second panel meeting in which the candidate will be interviewed. Then the panel, we have a discussion and we'll come up again with a ranking. In this case, the ranking is just A or B. A, if the proposal is excellent, there will be a threshold of, well, depending on the budget, of the availability of budget. So there might be some A's that cannot receive funding even if they are excellent. And finally, there will be some B's, even if they have no resubmission restriction. It's a feedback to the applicant that the proposal was excellent, but maybe not reaching the full excellent expected. Okay, so I will now provide some guidelines. I wouldn't call it tips, but just guidelines on how to prepare the proposal. The first part is the scientific project. That's the most important part. That's the part that you are writing as researcher. And I enter here a quote from one of our grantees, and I highlighted this proposal should be based on what you want to do. Take this as an opportunity to, I wouldn't call it a magic wand because there's no magic wand. You will do all the job, all the work. But this is an opportunity to think, what would I do if I have the opportunity to do whatever I would like in research? This is the possibility, this is the exercise you have to do now. And you write it, as I mentioned, in two parts. The part B1 should be concise, accessible to a wide audience, and convincing. You have to convince the panel that your proposal should pass to step two. So you have to demonstrate that your idea is new, it's groundbreaking, and it's doable. It's not a matter of going into the details of how you would do it, but you have to convince the panel that you can do that. Avoid too many references to the second part because some of these part B2s will never be read if you don't get the passport to the second step. In part B2 is where you develop all the methodological details, the research program, but please refrain from repeating the same information as part B1. It should add to part B1, but not repeat. And this is a novelty I will explain in a few slides. When you prepare your CV, you should take into account that this is not just publication. It's a track record of your achievement. I highlight these not just papers because also different fields of research are very different in the research output. For many of the, let's say, scientific disciplines in life science or in physical science, manuscript papers, journals, those are the main outcome. But in many other, especially, for example, in social sciences, it's not so often that you publish paper. There are other kind of monographs or books or scientific outputs that you can have. The most important thing is to highlight your role in those outputs. If you include manuscript papers that are multi-author papers, your name might be just one name among many others. So you should highlight your role in that research. I would like to mention and stress that impact factors is not a relevant indicator. The ERC embraced the thorough declaration a few years ago, The Doro Declaration states that the impact factor it should not be used as a shortcut to um, assess a researcher. In the case of a starting grant and consolidator grant, you also have to stress your independent thinking, that you are capable of doing your research on your own. I mentioned during when I presented the three scheme, the eligibility window extension. These are some examples of the causes for or the reasoning for eligibility station, mainly maternal or paternal care, but also other kinds of caring, any disability, military service, medical training, COVID impact, and from now on, also victims of gender-based violence. Do not hide this break in your CV. It raises some suspicion if you have a gap in your CV. But if you explain why is there a gap in your CV, it makes everything clear. And you should not be penalized for this. The last part of your proposal would be the budget. I mentioned the different rankings of budget, 1.5 million for starting grant, 2 million for consolidated grant, 2.5 for advanced grant, plus this extra budget that you may need. Usually this budget is for extensive field work or expensive field work campaigns, expensive lab work, use of big infrastructure, but also for relocation. If you have to move to the EU to carry out your project, but you don't need to go for the maximum. I always put the same examples. Often mathematics projects, they don't really need these resources as the one I mentioned because they don't need lab work. They can make it with just basically personal money and a few other devices, but not much more. On the contrary, medical research, they might need very expensive equipment, a lot of lab works. You don't need to go to the budget. Use your resources wisely, and you don't need to go for the extra money. So don't artificially inflate your budget. Then, if you are good enough to pass to the step two, you have to prepare for your interview. Again, some guidance on this. I would call some tips to prepare your interview. First of all, focus on the science. The interview would be managed by a panel of experts, of scientists. So you speak the same language. Focus on the science. Avoid overselling. Try to prepare, anticipate questions. What are the things that might be maybe so new that even experts are not so familiar? You should anticipate your question. Try not to read your presentation or your reply. That looks very unnatural, like you're not confident of what you're saying. Test yourself, do mock interviews, and just as a whole, practice, practice, and practice. I will highlight here some myths that are not quite correct. If you have some knowledge about the ERC, you may have heard that okay, ERC fund frontier research, but only pure research, not applied research. Well, this is not true. The truth is that it is not a requirement to make any application on your project. You don't need to include specific application or social impact, social application, social benefit. It's not a must. If it's there, great, but it will not be part of your assessment. As I mentioned before, the panels and the descriptor, they are not scientific priorities. There are no scientific priority at all at the ERC. You also may try to think which is the most convenient panel depending on how many proposals were funded on the year before. This is not correct. The budget is distributed as a function of the demand. So if a panel receives a lot of proposals submitted, they will have more budget. And that's the only reason. The success rate is flat across all the different of the different calls. Many people are tempted to wait until the very last year of the starting grant eligibility window because they think they have more chances, because they are more senior, because they have more publication. This is not right. As soon as you have your idea, you should prepare and try. Because publication record is not decisive in the selection process. You are not requested to have high impact publication. What you are supposed to demonstrate is your ability to do research and your creative thinking, not just a long CV. And finally, the host institution is not an evaluation criteria. This means that if you plan to do your research in a highly reputed institution, that doesn't give you any advantage as compared to any smaller or less recognized institution, as long as you have the resources and your research plan is clear and doable. Some more myths and some mistakes while you prepare your proposal submission or your interview. English native speakers have a clear advantage. No, this is not true. The panel members are all from all over the world. Of course, there will be some English native speakers, but there are people from all over the world. So we are used to different accents, to different English styles. Some people think that if they put an acronym that starts with an A, for example, or with an M, because it's on the middle of the alphabet, they will have better chances. Well, this is not true. Usually these proposals are often discounted on a random base, so no need to argue on that. But my advice would be try to come up with a clear acronym, not too long, because it's easier for a panel member to remember a straightforward acronym. When you pass to the interview, you may think you have more chances if your interview is early in the morning, while late in the afternoon, you might expect your panel be all falling asleep. No, this is not true. As I mentioned, these panel members, they are all scientists. They're all excited to hear new proposals, new ideas in science. What is really a mistake is that you look unsure, as I mentioned before, not read. If you're just reading your replies, if you're just reading your presentation, you may look unsure or unconvincing. When you reply to a question and you start wondering about without giving a straight reply and just giving vague replies, that is when your panel members probably will fall asleep. And try to be aware of recent development and to not hide if there is something that just recently came up that may affect your proposal, your research. So I just want to show here the increase in international participation. We've mentioned already several times that the ERC is open to researchers from all over the world, even if they have to move to the European Union. But if you see the starting grant and consolidator, so mainly for early career researchers, the increase in researchers from outside the EU is non-stop increase. At the top of these non-EU researchers, US, many people moving also or trying to relocate to the European Union, but also Canada, China, India, you have plenty of them. And many of the different countries, they are moving to or choosing Europe, as is one of the slogan now, choose Europe to do your research. At this stage, I would like to highlight some novelties for the next 2026 year call. First of all, there's some modification in the proposal structure. Scientific proposal part 1 or part B1, as it used to be called, it remains with maximum 5 pages. There is no change in that, but the feasibility of the proposal is only assessed at step 2. Feasibility meaning the full description of your working arrangement, and the methodology. Still, in the part B1 or part one, you have to show how are you going to approach, what is the strategy, and this have to make clear. So it's not that you only have a great idea, it's you have to show that you're able to do this idea, to put it in reality. The scientific proposal part two, what we used to call part B2, it's reduced to a maximum of 7 pages. It used to be more extent, but now it's reduced to 7 pages, precisely to avoid repeating part B1 in part B2. Part B2 is exclusively to describe the implementation, the methodology, the planning. Part B2 will only be assessed together with Part B1, meaning panel members will assess Part B1 at the first step of the evaluation, but they will also have that in mind when they pass to the step two evaluation. Whereas remote reviewers, they will receive all at once, part one and part two. So they are not separated. It's just one big proposal split it into. The budgets will also be part of the administrative part, so you don't have to include it in the scientific part. Also, some changes in the additional budget. As I mentioned, there is a normal additional budget of 1 million euros. There used to be some specific categories to request this extra money. Now there are no specific categories. You have to demonstrate that you need this money, but no specific target for this money. There is also this additional 1 million, so a total of up to 2 million euros if you are relocating to Europe. So you can have additional funding because your research needs it, but you also can apply for this extra money to move into Europe. And there will be also probably in the very near future some extra funding mechanism for this Choose Science Europe initiative. What are the expected changes for 2027? We are looking ahead. Well, the eligibility window for starting grant and consolidated grant might be changed and it might be extended. So for a starting grant, you can apply immediately after you defend your PhD and up to 10 years after. For consolidated grant, you will be able to apply after 5 years after defending your PhD and up to 15 years. So it will extend a little bit to the more experienced researchers. The counterpart for this is that you cannot be awarded more than one starting grant and one consolidated grant. That is the maximum. So just a brief summary. The ERC focus on excellent. We are looking for excellent research projects and excellent researchers that demonstrate independence and creativity. But we're looking for a proposal in any kind of research, any field, pioneering and adventuring, and maybe even unconventional, some risk-taking proposals. Here is a summary of the 2026 calendar. You still starting grant submission deadline has passed, so you can start thinking about the 2027 consolidator grant. It's still open, but you will have to rush. Advanced grant and synergy grant are advanced grant will open in 2026. Synergy grants for 2026 is already over as well, but you can also consider for the 2027 goal. If you want to learn more about ERC, you can also visit ERC project. You can, of course, EURAXESS, otherwise you would not be here, but you can also apply for visiting research fellowship, an international arrangement to get to know an ERC project from the inside. If you want more information about how to apply, there are YouTube videos with ERC classes where we explain everything in much more detail. Everything I have explained here as a summary is explained in much more detail. I also provide some useful links or when the presentation will be shared with all of you, so you can check this link. And this is all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
David, thank you so much for a very comprehensive presentation and also for a really a well thought through structure and also you guiding through the different steps of the proposal and also demystifying some myths about the ERC grant and the application process. So thank you so much. We have I think a few minutes before our second speaker will join us, who is himself a ERC grantee. So while we are waiting, David, we could take the opportunity for some Q&A, since the memory of the participants about your presentation is still very fresh. I will look into the Q&A. There are a few questions which I think you already have answered, but maybe it's good just to, recap them again. I think one of the question is also like what is the timeline like from when the call opens? How much time does one have, to prepare? Like in average, how many months? And what happens until this? How long does it take to get the news if one is selected or not?
It's very difficult to provide a timeline on how much time you need to prepare your proposal.
Mm,
Uh, I know a case of a person who prepared the proposal in 1.5 months, and he was successful. He obtained the grant, but he had a very clear idea. So
mm,
with a great idea in mind, you sit in front of the computer, you prepare the proposal. It can be done in 1 month, but I would never advise to take just 1 month because often it takes some iteration. It's good to share your first draft with some colleagues, some experienced researchers, ask for feedback. One tip that probably our invited grantee will mention, but many grantees they highlight the importance of sharing your first draft with someone that is not in your field.
mm,
Often said, if your grandmother understands your proposal, then it's a good proposal. Because especially for the step one, uh, it has to be accessible to a broad audience, and this takes some time. Then once the evaluation call is open, so the submission call is open, it's about it has some it's about 3-4 months.
okay.
Then the evaluation start. For example, the starting grant has just finished the submission period. The evaluation start evaluation phase will start shortly in a week. The final decision is expected by June, July.
Mhm.
That's where, so it's a period of about 7 to 8 months.
Okay. Mm. Okay, that's something to factor in. And thank you for that, David. There are also some questions which we come across when we are promoting the ERC and informing about the ERC in India is the 50-50 rule that 50% has to be conducted of the research time in Europe. So could you a bit more talk about that? How does it work in practice? Like for a researcher from India. Does that has to be in one go, or can it be split over the project? Like, if you could just highlight that a bit to us.
Yeah, it's the 50% rule is a minimum 50% in a European institution. So you need the agreement from a European institution, and
Mm,
then that that proves that you are based in Europe 50% of the time, 50% of the whole period of the project. So there is no rule. You can spend uh, the first half of the project here, the first half outside the EU. It has to make sense. That's
mm,
let's say the planning should make sense. Just
mm,
as an example, if you plan to stay 2.5 years based in Europe and you start with a group of let's say, three PhDs candidates starting in Europe, and then all of a sudden, after 2 years, you move abroad. What happened with those PhD candidates? Are they left alone? Or so that's the research planning should make sense.
Okay, okay, and how is it in terms like it's basically an agreement between the home institution and the host institution. Like it's up to the researcher then to make the best arrangements for him or herself, right? For this
Yeah, yeah.
50%.
If the European host institution accept your they have to accept when you submit the proposal. So you can negotiate
Hmm.
your arrangement. How can you, first of all, if they can provide some space, some infrastructure, that's the responsibility of the host institution to provide support in terms of infrastructure and administrative support for the grant. And yep, at that moment you can arrange with the institution and negotiate how can you split your time. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Another question which we often get is about this additional funding. Now it used to be 1 million, but there's now a top up to 2 million. What does it exactly include? Like, is it for setting up your lab, or are there other kind of costs which can be covered? Maybe if you could give some more examples of that.
Yeah, I can give the example from the past, but
Mm.
the future is, let's say, much more open. In the
Okay.
past, there were four categories for this additional budget: relocating to a European institution,
Hmm.
extensive lab and field work.
Hmm.
The third one was big machinery, big devices, or specific specific tools. And the fourth one was access to large facilities. So, as an example, relocating is clear. Large research, field work, or lab work. As I mentioned, in medical science, you really need a lot of lab work. Uh, mm, Fungible materials or reusable materials, non-reusable material, chemicals. Can be quite expensive. In my field, in earth science, field work can be an oceanographic campaign for 1.5 months.
Hmm.
The cost of the ships and all this material is very expensive. Access to large facilities was, for example, access to synchrotron facilities or to telescopes in the case of universe science. And finally, to set up the lab, any kind of device, analytical device or big machine that you need for the research. Those were the all categories. Now you simply have to support that you
Hmm.
need this extra money. So the maximum budget is 1.5, for example, for starting grant, and that covers personnel, overheads, um, some of the materials, but you need more
Hmm.
for whatever reason. If it's well supported, it can be accepted.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. And I think we take two more questions before we go to our next speaker. There's one question we have. Once the proposal is successful, what is the period researchers are given to start working on the ERC project? Like, is there like a time period within that they have to start, or?
Yeah, usually, well, the idea is to start as soon as possible, but there is no urgency, and there are several months where you can choose to start within the first few months, and there are also that would at some point may require an amendment if you are proposing to start more than 6 months. I'm saying 6 months, but I'm not 100% sure. I should double check. But if you are proposing to start more than 6 months after you sign the contract, you can make an amendment and request to
Mm,
make a latest kickoff.
mm, okay. Okay, thank you for that. And then one more question, David, is about we have here, I will read it to you. If I'm transitioning from a postdoctoral position and currently seeking a faculty appointment, am I eligible to apply for an ERC consolidator grant? Additionally, if I do not hold a position in India at the time of application, can I select a host institution in Europe and still submit my proposal? So basically, if I'm an independent researcher at the moment, I don't have affiliation here in India, but I'm interested to, can I still apply? Or do,
Yes. When you, mm, as I mentioned, when you submit your application, you need the support letter from a host institution.
yeah,
That doesn't mean that you have to have a position in that institution, but that the institution agrees to host you once you have the grant.
okay.
Uh, I'd like to go in a little bit deeper into that question because there's one feature that I didn't mention when I talked about the scientific research and independence.
Mhm.
Within the budget, you can claim your own salary, which means you don't need to have a proper affiliation. You don't need to have a permanent contract in that institution. You can request your own salary. And that also includes portability. If you are hosted in one institution and your grant includes your salary and you decide for whatever reason that you would like to move to another institution, you can ask for this moving and transfer everything, your whole grant, to a new institution. Should be agreed among the two institutions, but this is a possibility you always have.
Okay. But that's a very important piece of information. Thank you so much, David. Thanks again for this excellent presentation and also taking the time for the Q&A. I would now like to welcome our next speaker, who actually, is the one who has received an ERC grant. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Professor Mehul Malik. A very good morning to you, Professor Malik. Thanks so much for joining.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great. Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Professor Malik, I'll just give a very short introduction about you, but then I also will ask you, of course, to present yourself a bit more to the audience. So, as I said, Professor Mehul Malik is a professor of physics and Royal Academy of Engineering Chair in Emerging Technologies at the Heriot Watt University in Edinburgh, Scotland. He has received the ERC grant, starting grant, and he's also a Marie Curie Fellow, which makes him, for us, of course, an excellent speaker today because he kind of follows the European Commission's career trajectory with Marie Curie and ERC. So we're very, very happy to have you with us. And I will not take much more of your time and ask you, please, to, if you could kindly, I know, just in a few sentences, introduce yourselves, a bit about your background, and just tell us a bit about yourself. Thank you so much, Professor Malik.
Yeah, sure. So I can kind of summarize my career. It's quite a diverse one because as with any academic position, you tend to have moved around quite a lot. So I'm from India originally. I went to the US for my undergrad and my PhD. So I did my PhD at the University of Rochester in New York. After which I went to Austria for a postdoc. So, Samrat, you mentioned I had a Marie Curie fellowship. So I applied for a Marie Curie fellowship with a group, well, with a scientist in Austria, in Vienna. And then I moved there for 2 years. And I decided then, after 2 years in Europe, I decided that I really liked Europe. I liked the work-life balance, let's say. I can talk about that for a long time, but I decided to stay in Europe a bit longer, which today I'm quite glad I did, compared to, I mean, let's not discuss what's going on in the US right now. But so after staying in Vienna, so I ended up staying in Vienna for 5 years, doing a postdoc, applying for various some other additional funding. After which I came to the UK with a fellowship with the EPSRC, which is basically the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. It's the main science physics funding body in the UK. So with that fellowship, I started my group in 2018, and in 2019, I applied for an ERC starting grant. And this was, as you can imagine, an interesting time just before the pandemic, right? So I submitted my application September 2019. Uh, Probably the hardest I worked on any proposal. And then and then of course the world blew up in March 2020, and then I didn't have an interview because of this for my starting grant. The decision for the starting grant in 2020 was made entirely based on the proposal. So um, and then I heard in June or so from the ERC, I think June, July. But yeah, so that was my trajectory towards the ERC. Right now, I could say a lot more about my career. I mean, maybe I'll briefly mention. So I work in the field of quantum photonics, which is the study of light. I work with quantum effects such as entanglement. I work with quantum states of light that are structured in space and time, and we develop technologies for communication, computing, and sensing based on these quantum states of light. So my proposal was very much in this direction. So my ERC starting grant is called, the title is High Dimensional Quantum Technologies. Uh, I won't go into too many details. If you go online, you can find an abstract about it. But you asked me to kind of go through, the process, which or also maybe discuss some tips and advice. So, would you like me to do that now, or do you have other things you'd like me to touch upon? Sorry, you're muted, Samrat.
Sorry. Yeah, I would just like to, before we go to that part where you present, some tips and guidance, maybe
Hmm.
just, because you mentioned you first have been, you went to the US and then you did your Marie Curie in Austria, you were in Vienna, and then moved to the UK. So just, for many of our participants who are joining our webinars, the US is very clear, like there's a very clear understanding of the US academia, life in the US,
Hmm.
but still Europe is still not, so known, especially when it comes to having a research career in Europe.
Yeah,
So maybe you could get a bit tell us about the differences you have experienced, working in the US and then compared to working and living in Europe. Like what are the benefits and what are the challenges, and how did you,
sure.
adapt through your journey? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, by the way, I'm happy to answer questions, and actually, this is preferred if you ask me questions, and I can respond rather than me drone on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a good question. I mean, when I was in the U.S., it was mainly for my bachelor's and my master's and my PhD. So my experience as a mature researcher is I would say is slightly limited. I mean, in
Mhm.
terms of funding schemes and things like that. But I can tell you my impressions now, right? Because
Yeah.
I did apply for a job in the US at some point, but ended up staying in Europe. So
Mhm.
mm, a key difference is, well, so I would say work-life balance. There's a different approach, and this is not limited to academia. This is all professional jobs, right?
Mhm.
In America, there's a different conception of let's say uh, personal life and time that people feel like they can balance between work life and family life and social life. So there's a lot more emphasis on kind of work.
Mhm.
In outside of academia, it's quite normal to have a 2 weeks paid vacation when you start a job for the first 5 years. Whereas in Europe, it's quite normal to get 7 weeks paid vacation when you start. So you can see immediately the difference.
Yeah.
So I guess for me, the biggest uh, the biggest draw to Europe was that I get to decide how hard I want to work versus, kind of society deciding that for me.
Mhm.
So I would say I work quite hard, but I can choose when to stop in Europe. So it's very kind of self-propelled.
Mhm.
Another thing I could say is that the funding schemes are very different. So the way funding works, scientific funding works in the US, a large part of US funding comes from the Department of Defense.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of academic funding is also channeled through there, right? So a large part of my PhD was funded from the by the U.S. Air Force, grants in the U.S. Air Force. And I think that's just how funding in the US works, especially today with all the cuts to the NSF and various other organizations, public organizations in the US. In Europe, it's very different. There is very little defense funding being channeled towards academia. Most of the funding is large schemes like the ERC, like the European from the European Commission, and then of course you have country-specific funders, right? So in the UK we have our UKRI with councils such as EPSRC. We also have, you mentioned, I have a Royal Academy of Engineering chair. That's another organization that funds people in the UK. Then we also have the Royal Society, which is yet another funder. So now this is just the UK. Every country in Europe, so Germany has its own. It has the DFG, which is their version of
Mm.
the national funder. So
Yeah,
on top of all of these national funders, you have then the European funders,
right.
which is funded by money that each country puts into Horizon Europe, right? So
Exactly.
what I'm trying to say is that the diversity of funding programs means that there's a lot more flexibility, or let's say that there's a lot more possibility in what kind of research gets funded. It's not necessarily being decided by one organization. So the ERC tends to fund more curiosity-driven, excellence-driven research, like purely focused on the research. Then there are more applied schemes that focus on innovation and translation, and
Mm.
then your own country-specific funders might have different priorities. So there's a lot of possibilities in Europe.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. That was a very interesting, insight. Giving a bit of a comparison of based on your own experience, but also you mentioned, the multinational dimension we have here in Europe, with the different European Commission's funding programs, but
Mhm.
then you also have possible to tap into national funding programs as well. Um, but so Professor Malik, the other question was, like about the ERC grant it's per se. Of course, there's not so much awareness in India. We notice, Marie Curie is very, very well known. ERC is more for researchers who already are in Europe, already working at a
Mhm.
European host institution, that they kind of find out about the possibilities. But what was your like experience so far with an ERC grant? What you see as a benefit, and like also how what motivated you in the sense to apply for it?
I mean, the ERC is the grant, right?
Yeah.
It's really like the reputation and the what it does for your career, just in name, is quite
Mm,
significant.
mm,
Every researcher in Europe would like to have an ERC grant. One, it's so I already mentioned it's very much focused on excellent research, right? So there isn't so much that there are very few other considerations besides does this really push your field forward, right? And
mm,
so, which is very, very exciting and very refreshing as a researcher. So I can safely say that ERC is one of the only schemes that I have applied to where the focus is purely on excellence in research, and the review process is very rigorous. It's the people who review the ERC proposals, which are basically scientists like many of us,
mm.
really put a lot of effort into reviewing the science. Right? It's very little. I found that for my ERC starting grant, I had 12, 13 reviews. Most of which were very detailed, and actually I was really surprised, and some of them were even very helpful in
Mm,
helping me kind of you know carry out the research in terms of
mm.
advice and even criticisms. So
Yeah,
so I'd say ERC is yeah, it's a fantastic scheme, and of course people in Europe know about it. I can tell you a little bit about, I think, um, how one can go about trying to apply for one. I
yeah,
think so. You're talking to from the context of how can somebody in India apply
yeah,
for an ERC, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, right. So maybe some of this has been covered already, but I can give you my perspective, which is more of a like personal perspective based on
yeah,
my experience, right? So the previous speaker was mentioning the host institution. So when you apply, if you want to apply for an ERC, so it's a very, very, very competitive. It's the most competitive grant in Europe. So most
mm,
institutions, most universities in Europe have an internal process to
Mm,
select people for the ERC, right? They do not want to, they will not support every single person who applies for an ERC. So there's an internal process. So my university, for example, which is Heriot Watt University in Edinburgh here in Scotland, we have an internal panel. And
mm,
if you go to any university website, you'll probably find their kind of research office that you can approach and say, I'm a scientist, in India, I'm a researcher.
mm,
I would like to apply for an ERC proposal um, through your organization. What is the procedure? Right. So
mm,
what Harriet Watt would tell you is, well, we have an internal panel and we have some internal deadlines, usually 6 months, 6 to 12 months before the ERC deadline. And you would have to go through the panel where they would then ask you to submit a short, maybe two-pager proposal and say why you are a good candidate for this, and then they'll have an interview, right? So I would expect that this is quite a standard procedure
mm,
anywhere in Europe. If you approach a university and said, I want to apply for an ERC grant, because it's serious business, it takes a lot of effort, both on your part and the university's part.
yeah,
And so you have to be a competitive candidate for them to select you or to support you, right? Even though you're doing most of the work and you are bringing all the money in, they have probably have lots of good internal candidates who would like to be in your position.
yeah,
So that's how it works here at Harriet Watt. So the first tip I would give is find a host. Um, don't just go to the top university in your dream country. Um,
yeah,
that's not realistic, right? Find a realistic host that will be interested in hosting you,
mm,
and then see if you are competitive at that university or institute, right? And
yeah,
then so basically you have to start quite early.
yeah,
Um, it helps if you know people at that institution and ask them the process. You could approach them and say, can you just put me in touch with the right person, or how do I go about doing this? Yeah.
mhm, yeah. Thank you so much. I think that that's very useful, to see that, that there are internal processes already and protocols at the universities in Europe. And if you come like, from the outside, it's very important, to see already, whom to contact and then and follow their procedures. Uh,
Mhm.
Professor Malik, do you have any other like, key tips, advice for candidates who are now considering to
Yeah.
apply? That would be very nice if you could share those with us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I made a few notes before this. Okay, so first was the find a host, right? Start early. There's an internal process. The second was you should start developing your idea early, right?
Mhm.
So the ERC funds kind of the top curiosity-driven, excellence-based research, let's say, whatever, that's a slightly vague term. But the idea is that you want to be doing something or proposing something that really pushes the envelope in your field, right? So what the best thing that I did for my first grant was discuss my ideas with senior colleagues. So senior
Mhm.
by senior, I mean people kind of at the same level as you or who are doing well in your field, and you
Mhm.
and you have a good relationship with, to just throw ideas at them and say, what do you think of this? Like, do you
Yeah.
think this is an exciting idea? And I think that is very useful. So get feedback at an early stage. The second thing is the ERC. It always helps if you are building on prior research. So to have some preliminary work done
Mm.
to show that in your proposal, right? And even in the internal process, to say that I have done this work and now my proposal builds on these
Yeah.
very exciting results. If they're published or not published or a conference proceeding, it's all good because you're being judged by other academics. And
Yeah.
if they see that you have a plan or you're building on some exciting work, I think that's important.
Mm.
Um, Looking at past project abstracts online is helpful. So if
Mhm.
you just go online and Google, ERC starting grants or ERC consolidators from this year or previous year, you'll see a list of abstracts.
Yeah.
And at some point, list of titles, project titles. And then
Yeah.
you can find the abstracts at some usually after some time. Like if you Google my ERC grant, you will find the abstract, right? And so
Yeah.
from that, those abstracts, you get a sense of what are these projects like. Find the ones in your panel. So the ERC has different panels, right? So find the panel that's most relevant to you and look for the projects that have been funded in that panel. And then also it'll give you a sense of, are you competitive for this, right? So you
Mm.
can look at the people who are getting funded, and let's
Yeah.
be realistic. Like this takes a lot of effort. You don't want to be doing this if you are not going to be competitive, right? Because you'll end up spending a lot of time. It is a learning experience, but your best time to do it is when you have a strong chance. Um, so have a look at the projects, have a look at the people who have been funded. Um, Read the evaluation criteria very carefully. So this is
Hmm.
all in the work program of the ERC. If you go through the ERC work program, it'll have all the documents that are given to the reviewers, which are actually very few. The reviewer instructions are literally a couple of pages for how to review your proposal, right?
Hmm.
It's very clearly written. It's a part of it is for your own judging how good you are as a researcher. Part of it is how ambitious and how exciting the proposal is. So have a look at that and kind of ask yourself while you're developing your idea, do I meet these criteria? Does this research meet the criteria that the ERC is looking for? The proposal itself should have in my opinion, should have a good balance of ambition and risk. I think so. You can write a proposal that is completely out there and just super, super risky and super ambitious, but then you have there's a chance that some people might consider that to be too risky, or
Hmm.
if you don't have enough preliminary work to show the feasibility. So I personally recommend that people take a balanced approach, have a
Hmm.
significant part of your proposal that is feasible, that is building on prior work, and then also have some component that is very ambitious, right? Because the ERC doesn't want to just fund kind of standard stuff. They want to fund the next big thing. Um, it's important to show that to show independence from your supervisor. So if you've done a PhD, to have published without your supervisor, it's important. And if you're a postdoc applying for, let's say, a consolidator, you must have published without, well, as a senior author, so as last
Yeah.
author, at least in my field. So that's really important to demonstrate that in your proposal. And then the final thing I would say is that to clearly to remember that you are the driver of the research, right? So it's very important that in your proposal you don't consider this is not a collaborative proposal. This is not a research consortium. This is your project.
Yeah.
So you want to show that you are the driver of the project. You're allowed to mention collaborators, but these need to be carefully justified. It needs to be specifically like connected to topics that in your proposal rather than you're just going to work with these people, right? So I think having that clear is very important to show that why should you be the one doing this work, right?
Yeah.
So that I think yeah that's the last tip I wanted to give.
Thank you so much, Professor Mike. I think very valuable tips. And I will also ask David to join us again, maybe for a final round of maybe comments. And I see there are a few more questions there. And I think, David, there's the one question about I think that was already mentioned in your presentation. There are no age restrictions, right? To apply for an ERC.
Indeed. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you a lot, Professor Malik, for his testimonial. I always, when we organize this kind of thing, this kind of event, we always try to have a grantee because your
Yeah.
testimonial is much more valuable, but of anything I could say. So thank you very much. Yeah, but the age restriction, no age restriction. Age is not contemplated at all. Even very senior researchers, if they want to continue research and they have a valid affiliation and agreement with the host institution. So there's no age restriction.
And David, also about resubmission, like we know with the Marie Curie, there is a restriction to resubmission. How is it for the ERC?
For the ERC, if you pass to step two, you have no restriction at all. So if your
Hmm.
proposal passed from step one to step two, no restriction. If at step one you obtain an A score, but you cannot be invited, basically it's just for time reasons. You're not invited for the interview, but you still have an A, no restriction. If at step one you have a B, is 1 year restriction. If you have a C, it's a 2 year restriction.
Mm. Okay. Okay. And I saw another question. It is about the yeah. If I'm applying for a ERC grant, how important is it that it has to be connected to my past research, or can it be something totally new? Like, it can be a totally new idea or even a new field. What is the take on that?
You need to prove that you're capable of carrying out that particular research. Meaning, if you are working on chemistry and you proposed astronomy proposal, you have to really have a very
Yeah,
solid
yeah,
proposal. But maybe you are analyzing astronomical chemistry, cosmochemistry, but it has to be very solid. So, as Professor Malik said, it should be based on what you know. That's
mm,
the ground where you want to build your research. But yes, of course, anything that is new, that's what the ERC is encouraging. You have a background, but you want to build something new. And a change on discipline, if you can prove that you are capable of doing it, yes, of course.
okay,
I should add that, it's important to remember that you are going up against the best researchers in the world. So be careful about basically how much risk you take on.
yeah,
It's not realistic to propose new ideas with a solid background or solid justification or evidence of some, I guess, prior success that would convince a panel or a reviewer that this is feasible.
yeah,
So remember that you're competing with the best, and you better have a good story, right?
mm, yeah, yeah. That's very
If I
important.
if if I may add just one extra tip on this, you are competing with the very best people. That's true. Although the trend currently in the ERC is to uh, try to step into a field that you don't know very well. You have to keep in mind that you will be evaluated by the top people in that field. So it's not easy to convince those people that you are uh, the best person to do that.
Mm, yeah, thank you so much, both of you. I think there's one more question. I think that I could ask Professor Malik to answer because it's about one of the participants just has been awarded MSCA grant and she's is going to start it soon and but already thinking for the ERC. So how soon should one think, for applying for an ERC? Like you have been in a similar situation. You were a Marie Curie.
Yeah.
Like when did you start thinking for an ERC? To apply for an ERC grant?
So, okay, that's a good question. So my own personal take on this is why, have a think about why we are doing this, right? Why do we apply for big grants and prestigious funding? So that we can do research.
Yeah.
So I think that it's important to actually take some time and actually do that before you start thinking about the next grant, right? And I think this will help you with the ERC later if you have some very solid successes to show. So my recommendation is to actually not start thinking about the ERC until you have done what you promised or proposed to do in your Marie Curie and build
Yeah.
your career some, right? You want to show independence. So this is definitely not the time to start thinking about the ERC. Rather, thinking about how to develop your independent career, research
Mm.
career, how to develop yourself as a researcher. This is the time to think about that. And eventually, you will get to this stage where the ERC is the right platform for you to
Yeah.
then apply for other funds. Yeah, it's also helpful to start thinking about maybe smaller pots of money, small grants that might help you show independence. But really, the focus should be on research and developing yourself as a researcher rather than
Yeah.
getting more funding.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Um, let's have like a final round, like some final words, final tips, advice, concluding words from our speakers. Maybe we start with David. Could you just give, like some few concluding words to our audience?
Well, first of all, I invite all the audience to participate and to submit a proposal. And, and to submit the proposal, the first invitation is to think of a big idea. Have that in mind that the best preparation for submitting an ERC proposal is to have an idea. And that is the most important aspect to evaluate.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Professor
Yeah.
Malik.
So I think maybe I can end with, saying that this is a difficult thing to do, right? To build a career in academia.
Mm,
And there are many. So I guess maybe my parting word should be don't limit yourself to only doing this, right? Because it's not easy. And I think while it's amazing to get an ARC grant, there are actually many other ways to have a very successful career in research. And so explore all of those opportunities, right? So this is one very amazing, exciting opportunity. But really, if you don't get it, and many people don't get it, it's okay because there's many other possibilities, especially in today's day and age.
mm. There's the Marie Curie, of course. We want you, of course, to stay within the European,
Well, the
funding
Marie
program.
Curie is really an amazing fellowship scheme as
Yeah.
well. And again, I think everything that I said about finding a host, networking is
Yeah.
also applies to Marie Curie, right? So you need to
Yeah.
really start early, and again, the internal processes also apply to the Marie Curie
Yes.
normally.
Yeah. Yeah. But as of course, thank you so much, Professor Malik. But as David said, like, this is a very great opportunity for you today, what we have presented to understand a bit better what the ERC is about, the rationale behind it, and the different opportunities for applying at a different career stage. There are the different grant schemes which David outlined to you. And then, of course, we were very happy to have Professor Mehul Malik, who himself has received a grant and has given you some very interesting and important insights to his journey with the ERC. And so with that, I would say we conclude today's session. Thank you so much for all your attention and wishing you a very nice evening in India and a good lunchtime in Europe and a happy weekend to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye bye.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you
Nice
very
to see
much. Bye bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.